The late afternoon light filtered through the kitchen curtains, painting a soft golden glow across the table where Laura sat with her cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. It was one of those calm evenings she had grown to love. Peaceful, simple, filled with the kind of silence that made her feel safe. But that calm was about to shift in a way she didn't expect. Ethan had just come home from college for the weekend. At 20, he was polite, quiet, and still finding his way in life. Laura had always thought of him as kind and thoughtful, the kind of young man any parent would be proud of. She remembered the first time she met him back when she married Michael 3 years ago. Ethan had been reserved then, shy around her, still adjusting to the idea of a stepmother. But over time they had built something gentle between them, a trust that came from small things, shared dinners, car rides, and little talks about school and life. That evening she noticed something different in his eyes. He seemed distracted, like his thoughts were elsewhere. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled slightly. "Laura, can I ask you something?" She smiled, unaware of what was coming. "Of course, Ethan. What's on your mind?" He hesitated. She could tell whatever he was about to say wasn't easy. His fingers tapped nervously against the table and his eyes flicked toward the floor. Then, after a long pause, he said quietly, "It's about my first time." Laura blinked, not sure she heard right. "Your first time?" She repeated softly. Ethan nodded quickly, embarrassed. "Yeah. I mean, not like he stopped himself, clearly struggling to find the right words. I just don't know how to handle it. I don't want to mess it up." Laura felt a wave of surprise, then sympathy. She had expected a question about classes or his father, not something so personal. Still, she could see he wasn't joking. He was genuinely anxious, and more than that, he trusted her enough to ask. That trust meant something. She tried to keep her tone light. "Ethan, you don't have to be embarrassed. Everyone feels unsure before something important. It's normal." He looked at her with a kind of relief, but also confusion. "It's just, I don't really have anyone else to ask. Dad's never been good with this stuff. Hugh, you understand people better?" Her heart softened. There was no awkwardness now, only a quiet realization that he saw her as someone safe, someone who could guide him, that reminded her of when her own son, back when he was younger, came to her for advice about his first relationship. She had always believed these moments mattered when someone trusted you with their uncertainty. Still, a part of her didn't know what to say. This was new territory. She wasn't his mother, yet she cared about him deeply. She wanted to choose her words carefully to give him comfort without crossing any lines. She smiled gently. "Ethan, what exactly are you worried about? Is it the emotional part, or just the idea of it?" He thought for a moment. "Both. I guess I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to seem inexperienced, but I also don't want to pretend I know what I'm doing." His honesty was disarming, so open, so raw. Laura nodded. "It's actually very mature of you. Most people your age don't even think that way. The truth is, being nervous means you care. If you want it to be meaningful, not just something you do to prove something." He looked at her with gratitude. "I knew you'd understand." The room grew quiet again. For a few seconds, all she could hear was the steady ticking of the clock. Laura could see that this conversation wasn't just about a first time. It was about growing up, about learning how to care, how to connect. She realized Ethan wasn't seeking instruction. He was seeking reassurance. Something emotional rather than physical. She leaned back in her chair, speaking gently. "Ethan, real love isn't about being perfect or experienced. It's about being kind, patient, and honest. The rest comes naturally when you truly care for someone." Ethan's shoulders relaxed. He smiled faintly, the tension easing from his face. "That actually makes sense," he said softly. "I've been overthinking everything." Laura laughed lightly. "That's what young people do best." He smiled too, and for a brief moment the air between them felt calm again. But beneath that calm, Laura sensed something else, something subtle, unspoken. It wasn't wrong or uncomfortable, just different. She couldn't quite name it, but it felt like a shift, as if the space between them had quietly changed. That night, as she stood by the sink washing dishes, Laura replayed the conversation in her mind. She wasn't sure why it stayed with her, but it did. There was something touching about the way Ethan had looked at her, not just as his stepmother, but as someone he genuinely trusted. It reminded her how rare real connection was, especially in a world where people were always rushing, pretending, or hiding behind their confidence. She wondered how Michael would have handled the same conversation, probably with a nervous joke or by changing the subject. He was a good man, but not the emotional type. Maybe that was why Ethan had come to her instead. Later, when Ethan walked past the kitchen, he stopped for a moment. "Thanks again, Laura," he said quietly. "I really needed that talk." She smiled. "Anytime. Just remember, the best things in life happen when you're honest with yourself." He nodded, then went upstairs, leaving Laura standing there with her hands still wet from the dishes. She stared at the window, at the fading light outside. A part of her heart felt full, proud that she could help him. But another part, small and confusing, felt a little heavy. Maybe it was the sudden awareness that Ethan wasn't a boy anymore. He was growing into a man, thoughtful and kind. With the same sincerity that once drew her to Michael, she shook the thought away. It was just emotion, she told herself, the kind that came when you saw someone grow up before your eyes. Still, she couldn't deny that the moment had touched her more deeply than she expected. When she went to bed later that night, the house felt unusually still. The quiet wasn't empty. It was filled with the echo of that short, meaningful conversation. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange life could be. One small question, asked with vulnerability, could open a door you didn't even know existed, not to romance or desire, but to understanding, to emotional truth. And as she drifted towards sleep, Laura told herself one thing. Whatever this new connection meant, she would handle it with care. Because trust, once given, was something sacred. That night, she didn't know how much that moment would change both their lives. How one conversation, born from nervous honesty, would become a turning point neither of them could ever forget. The next morning, the sky was gray and soft rain tapped against the windows. The world outside looked quiet, like it was holding its breath. Laura stood by the counter making breakfast when she noticed Ethan sitting alone in the living room. He wasn't on his phone or watching TV, he was just staring out the window, lost in thought. Something about his stillness made her pause. She poured 2 cups of coffee and walked over. "Hey," she said gently. "Mind if I join you?" He looked up and smiled faintly. "Sure." They sat together, the only sound being the rain and the ticking clock. Laura could tell he was still thinking about last night's conversation. His eyes had that same uncertain look, like someone searching for something he couldn't name. "You're quiet today," she said. He shrugged. "I've just been thinking about what you said yesterday, about love being simple." Laura smiled softly. "It is simple. It's people who make it complicated." Ethan turned to her, his brow furrowed. "But what if I don't even know what real love feels like yet? Everyone around me acts like it's supposed to be easy, like you just meet someone and that's it. But it never feels that clear." Laura nodded. She could remember being his age, thinking the same thing, believing that love was supposed to just happen magically. "That's because love isn't a spark," she said. "It's a choice. You build it, little by little, through trust, honesty, and kindness. The spark only starts the fire. It's the care that keeps it burning." Ethan listened closely, the rain still whispering outside. "You make it sound so different from what people say." "That's because most people talk about love like it's a movie," she said with a quiet laugh. "They forget that real love has awkward silences, small mistakes, and a lot of patience. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real." He smiled at that. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "You see, when you love someone truly, you don't need everything to go right. You just want them to feel safe. That's how you know it's real, when their happiness matters more than your pride." He nodded slowly, and for a moment he seemed older, like her words had carved something deep inside him. "I think I've been scared of that," he said. "Scared of caring too much? Scared of getting hurt?" Laura looked at him gently. "Everyone's scared of that, Ethan, even adults. But if you never risk caring, you'll never know what love really is." He leaned back, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. "It's strange," he said after a pause. "I feel like I can talk to you about things I can't talk to anyone else about." That caught her a little off guard, though his voice was warm, not awkward. She smiled. "That's what family's for." "Yeah," he said, still looking out the window. "But it's more than that. You actually listen." Laura didn't know what to say to that. There was sincerity in his tone, something that touched her in a quiet way. He wasn't saying it to flatter her, he truly meant it. She had always tried to make Ethan feel heard. But hearing him acknowledge it now felt unexpectedly emotional. To break the silence, she asked, "So, what do you think love means to you?" He thought for a moment before answering, "Maybe. It's when someone sees you for who you are, not what you pretend to be." Laura smiled, impressed by his honesty. "That's a very wise answer." He laughed a little. "Maybe I learned that from you." Her heart warmed at that. It was strange, but in that moment, she didn't just see him as her husband's son. She saw him as a young man trying to understand life, love, and the kind of person he wanted to become. There was something touching about his openness. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both watching the rain. The air felt peaceful but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Laura realized that this conversation was doing more than giving advice. It was connecting them. Not in a romantic way, but in a human way. A bridge of understanding had formed between two people from different worlds, both learning from each other. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Do you ever miss being my age?" Laura smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes. But I don't miss the confusion. I used to think love was supposed to fix everything. I learned that love doesn't fix you, it helps you grow." He nodded slowly. "That's a good way to see it." Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael, who was still at work. She glanced at it, then back at Ethan. "Your dad should be home late tonight," she said. "Yeah," he replied softly. "I kind of like having this quiet time, though. It feels nice." Laura didn't know why, but that simple sentence stayed in her mind. Maybe it was because the house did feel peaceful, almost too peaceful. There was no noise, no rush, just calm conversation and rain. She felt connected in a way she hadn't in a long time. They spent the rest of the morning talking. Not about relationships anymore, but about small things: college, friends, movies. Life. Ethan spoke with an honesty that made Laura realized how lonely he had probably been at school. Beneath his calm surface, there was a gentle soul trying to make sense of growing up before he went upstairs. He turned back and said, "Thanks, Laura, for listening. You really made things clearer." She smiled warmly. "Anytime, Ethan, that's what I'm here for." When he left, Laura sat quietly, staring at her coffee. She felt something in her chest, not attraction, but emotion. It was a kind of protectiveness mixed with empathy. Maybe even admiration for his courage to ask such hard questions. That afternoon, as she cleaned up, she thought about how unexpected life could be. You marry someone. You become part of another family. And suddenly you find yourself guiding a young man through the most delicate emotions of his life. It wasn't something she planned for, but it felt meaningful. Later that day, she found a note on the table. Ethan had gone for a walk but left a small message. "Thanks for being real with me. I won't forget what you said." Laura smiled when she read it. She folded the paper carefully and placed it inside a kitchen drawer. It wasn't much, but it meant something. It was proof that she had made a difference, that her words had reached him. That night, when Michael came home tired and distracted, Laura felt a little distant. Not because she wanted to be, but because she realized how rare true connection was, and how easily it could appear in unexpected places. She didn't tell Michael about the conversation. It wasn't a secret. It's just something private, a moment between two people trying to understand life before going to bed. Laura stood by the window and watched the rain ease into mist. The house was dark and quiet again. She thought of Ethan's words, "You actually listen." They stayed with her like an echo. For the first time in a long while, she felt both proud and uncertain. Proud that she had been there for him. Uncertain of why the moment had touched her so deeply. Maybe it was because it reminded her that love, in all its forms, was about kindness, about being there when someone needed you the most. She didn't know what would come next. But one thing was clear in her heart: that morning had changed something. It had awakened emotions she couldn't yet name, but she knew they were real, honest, and human. And sometimes that was enough. A week later, the rhythm of the house changed again. Michael had been called away on a short business trip, leaving Laura and Ethan alone for a few days. It wasn't unusual. Michael traveled often, but this time things felt slightly different. Since their talk about love, an invisible thread had formed between Laura and Ethan. It wasn't romantic, not inappropriate, just a quiet understanding that made their presence feel warmer, closer. On the first night without Michael, Laura made pasta for dinner. They sat together at the small kitchen table, laughing about college stories and old memories. The conversation flowed easily, almost too easily. Laura noticed how comfortable Ethan had become, how his shy smile now carried a confidence she hadn't seen before. She liked seeing him this way, lighter, more sure of himself. After dinner, they decided to watch an old romantic movie. It was one of Laura's favorites, the kind with soft music, slow moments, and lessons about love. As the film played, Ethan's focus drifted from the screen to her face. He wasn't staring, but she could feel it, that quiet, curious attention of someone seeing another person in a new light. Halfway through the movie, he said quietly, "You really believe in love like that, don't you?" Laura smiled faintly, eyes still on the screen. "I do. Not the movie kind, but the real kind, the kind that grows quietly." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think that's what I want someday. Something honest." "You will," she said softly. "You just have to wait for the right person, someone who makes you feel at peace." He looked at her then, and for a brief second, Laura felt her breath catch. There was nothing inappropriate in his gaze, but there was depth, admiration, respect, something she couldn't name. She quickly turned back to the screen, pretending not to notice. When the movie ended, neither of them spoke for a while. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of rain outside. Then Ethan said, I think that talk we had really changed me. I feel like I understand things differently now." Laura smiled, trying to keep the moment light. "I'm glad to hear that. It means I didn't completely confuse you." He laughed softly. "No, you didn't. You actually made me think about love in a real way, about care, about being patient. It's strange, but I've never had that kind of talk with anyone before." Something about his honesty touched her deeply. She could see how much he had grown, not just in words, but in the calmness of his tone. He was maturing, becoming a man who thought before he spoke, who felt deeply. She felt proud of him, but also a little protective. Over the next few days, they spent more time together, cooking, talking, sharing small things about their lives. It felt natural, even comforting. Yet every now and then, Laura caught herself overthinking. She wondered if their closeness might seem odd to others, even though nothing inappropriate had happened. Still, she couldn't deny that something had quietly shifted inside her. On the second night, they sat outside on the porch, watching the stars. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain-soaked grass. Ethan leaned against the railing, his hands in his pockets. "It's nice out here," he said softly. "It is," Laura replied, wrapping her sweater tighter around her. "Nights like this make me think about how fast time goes." He looked at her with genuine curiosity. "Do you ever wish you could go back? Like to your 20s? She smiled, half amused. "Sometimes. But honestly, I wouldn't trade what I know now for the confusion I had back then." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I get that. I feel like I'm learning things too fast. Like I want to be ready for love, but I'm still figuring myself out." Laura looked at him, admiring how openly he spoke about his feelings. "That's exactly what your 20s are for," she said gently. "You're supposed to feel lost sometimes. That's how you learn." He turned his gaze toward her again, his expression calm but full of thought. "You always say the right thing," he said quietly. "It's like you just understand." Laura felt a twinge in her chest, a mix of pride and something softer, more fragile. She smiled, trying to keep her voice steady. "Maybe because I've made my share of mistakes." Ethan laughed lightly. "Then you learn from them well?" She looked away, pretending to focus on the stars. But deep inside, something about that moment felt heavy. She wasn't sure what she was feeling: affection, protectiveness, or something more complex. Whatever it was, she knew she had to handle it carefully. The next day, Laura went about her chores, but she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words and the way he looked at her last night. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was gratitude, simple, innocent gratitude. And yet every time she saw him smile, she felt her heart soften in ways she hadn't felt in years. That evening, she found Ethan sitting quietly in the living room again, reading a book. The soft glow from the lamp highlighted the side of his face. He looked peaceful, grown up, so different from the boy who once hid behind his father's shadow. "You're reading?" she teased lightly. He smiled. "Trying to... You said love grows through patience, right? I'm practicing that one page at a time." Laura laughed. "Then you're already learning fast." He looked at her with a faint smile that lingered a little longer than usual. "You've changed how I see people, Laura. I used to think love was just about attraction, but now I get it. It's more about kindness, the way someone makes you feel safe." She felt her heart twist at his words. They were innocent, yet they carried a quiet truth that made her eyes sting for a moment. She realized how rare it was for someone to see love that way, to value safety and understanding above all else. As the night grew quiet, they both sat in a soft silence, the kind that didn't need words. It wasn't romantic, it was deeply human, the kind of connection that came from shared honesty and warmth. But later, when Laura went to bed, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan, his openness, his sincerity, his newfound maturity. She wasn't in love with him, but she felt something that stirred old emotions she thought had long faded: the feeling of being seen, valued, understood. She turned in bed and stared at the ceiling, realizing how complicated emotions could be. People always thought love was clear, black and white, but it wasn't. It came in shades: affection, care, gratitude, understanding, and sometimes those shades blurred into something hard to define. Laura knew she had to keep boundaries, to protect both him and herself from any misunderstanding. But she also knew that this connection, however strange or brief, had changed something in both of them. The next morning, as she passed Ethan in the hallway, he smiled at her, warm and genuine. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her heart steady but thoughtful. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes life brought people together not to fall in love, but to remind each other what love truly meant: patience, care, and understanding. Ethan was growing into a man, and Laura was learning, once again, what it meant to guide someone with compassion. It was confusing, emotional but pure, a connection built not on desire, but on truth. And though Laura didn't know what the next days would bring, she knew one thing for sure: love, in its most honest form, could exist even in the quiet space between hearts without crossing a single line. The morning after Michael returned home, the house felt different, louder, fuller, but also heavier. Laura tried to act normal, moving through her day as if nothing inside her had shifted. But she knew things weren't the same. Ethan had changed. She had changed. The quiet understanding they had shared over those few days had left a mark she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't love in the romantic sense, but it had depth, honesty, and emotion, the kind that stayed long after words ended. Michael spent most of his first day back buried in work calls. At dinner, he chatted about business, never noticing the small glances exchanged across the table. Not secret, but thoughtful. Ethan seemed quieter than usual, polite but distant, as if something was on his mind. When Laura met his eyes, he looked away quickly. She understood. They were both carrying the same unspoken truth. Their closeness had reached a point where something had to be said, or it would become too heavy to ignore. Later that evening, Michael fell asleep early on the couch. Laura stood in the hallway, looking toward Ethan's room. She hesitated for a long time before finally knocking softly. "Ethan, can we talk for a minute?" He opened the door, surprised, but calm. "Yeah, sure." She stepped inside, her hands clasped together. The room was neat, simple, filled with the faint scent of his cologne and a stack of college books on the desk. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," she began. He smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Just thinking about what?" she asked, though she already knew. He looked at her for a moment before speaking. "About us. About the last few days." His voice was steady but soft. "It's strange, Laura. I feel like I learned more from you in 1 week than I have in years. I don't know how to explain it." Laura took a deep breath. "Ethan, what happened between us? The talks, the time we spent, it was special. But it has to stay what it was. A friendship, a bond built on respect." He nodded slowly. "I know. I just don't want to lose it." "You won't," she said gently. "But sometimes love, the real kind, means stepping back before it turns into something it's not meant to be." He stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "It's just hard. You're the first person who ever made me feel like I could be honest, like I could be myself." Laura's eyes softened. "And that's exactly why you need to hold on to that lesson, not the feeling. What you're feeling isn't wrong, Ethan. It's just new. You're learning what connection feels like, and that's okay. But it's important to understand where to draw the line." He nodded again, but his eyes were glossy. "I get it," he whispered. "I don't want to make things weird. I just care about you, that's all." Laura's voice was calm but filled with emotion. "And I care about you too, very much. You've grown into a kind, thoughtful man. But part of caring is knowing when to let go, even when it hurts." There was silence. Rain began to fall softly outside again, just like the day they had first talked. It made the moment feel like a quiet ending, gentle but final dot. Ethan stood up slowly, his expression serious yet peaceful. "You've been more than a stepmother to me, Laura. You've been a friend. I won't forget that." Laura smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "That's all I ever wanted." He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged her. It was a pure, honest embrace, not romantic, not inappropriate, just two souls saying goodbye to something unspoken. It was the kind of hug that said, "Thank you for teaching me what love really means." When they pulled apart, she said softly, "Someday, you'll meet someone who makes you feel the same warmth, someone your own age, someone who sees your heart the way it deserves to be seen. And when that happens, you'll understand why this moment mattered." He smiled weakly. "I think I already do." Laura left his room quietly and stood in the hallway for a long time. Her heart ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that comes from doing the right thing, even when it hurts. She looked back once and saw Ethan sitting at his desk, staring at the rain with a calm, thoughtful expression. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Michael chatted at breakfast, completely unaware of the quiet, emotional storm that had passed through his home. Ethan spoke politely, smiled when needed, and then left for campus later that afternoon. Before leaving, he stopped by the front door and turned to Laura. "Thanks for everything," he said simply. She nodded, her voice soft. "Take care of yourself." As his car disappeared down the street, Laura felt a strange stillness settle inside her. She wasn't sad, not exactly, more reflective. Some bonds weren't meant to last forever. They were meant to teach, to awaken something human and kind within us. Ethan had reminded her of the importance of connection, of listening, of love that had nothing to do with romance, but everything to do with empathy. Days turned into weeks. Life slipped back into routine. Michael stayed busy, and Laura filled her days with work and books. But every now and then, she'd remember those quiet moments on the porch or the talks during the rain. She never saw them as mistakes. There were lessons about emotion, trust, and the fragile line between caring deeply and caring too much. Months later, Laura received a postcard from Ethan. It was simple, a photograph of his college town in autumn colors. On the back, he'd written, "You were right. Real love does come quietly. Thank you for teaching me that." Laura smiled when she read it. She placed the postcard in her favorite book, not as a secret, but as a memory of something meaningful and human. That evening, sat on the same porch where they had once talked about life and love. The wind was cool, the sky a gentle orange. For the first time in a long while, Laura felt at peace. She realized that not all connections were meant to last forever. Some came only to remind you of who you are and what truly matters. Ethan's presence had reminded her of compassion, patience, and the quiet beauty of guiding someone toward understanding. He had walked into her life with confusion and walked out wiser, and she had grown too, learning that love's purest form is selfless as the sun dipped below the horizon. Laura whispered softly to herself, "Sometimes the hardest love is the one that lets go." Years later, Ethan would tell his friends about the woman who taught him what love truly meant, not through romance, but through kindness and truth. And Laura, whenever she thought of him, would feel warmth, not regret, because some stories aren't about being together. They're about learning from each other, growing quietly, and moving forward with grace. And that was the beauty of their story. Not a forbidden one, not a broken one, but a story about two hearts meeting at the right time to remind each other that real love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go with peace, gratitude, and understanding. It was a chapter that ended gently, not in heartbreak, but in wisdom. A story of love that grew in silence, taught them both how to feel deeply, and then faded, leaving behind only respect, kindness, and calm. And for Laura, that was enough.